this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget.
Today I'm pleased to welcome Chris Fenning to the show. Chris is an internationally recognized author, communication coach, and corporate trainer who is on a mission to make workplace conversations more efficient. He's the author of 4 books, including the one we're going to dive into today called The First Minute, a guide to starting conversations and get results. He works with professionals across different industries to improve how teams talk to each other, especially when it comes to explaining ideas simply and getting to the point, which I'm a big fan of. Chris is known for his straightforward approach, including tools like the GPS model, goal, problem, solution, that helps make meetings and conversations more useful. If you've ever felt frustrated by meetings that go in circles, been there, done that, or conversations that miss the mark, you'll get a lot out of today's episode. Chris, it's so great to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's a topic I absolutely love talking about briefly, and it's something that will help a lot of people right away.
Yeah, so if you look behind his shoulder, you'll see The First Minute if you're watching this. And then, of course, I've got a copy right here as well, The First Minute, so really good stuff. The first question I like to ask everybody who comes on the show, I like to think of all of y'all who visit me as superheroes, and every superhero has an origin story. So what's your backstory?
What a great visual that everyone who comes on is a superhero. We're all helping somebody in some way, somewhere.
Yes.
So my origin story is I started out as an engineer. I was very technical background, aerospace, satellite design, and over the course of 20 years, I worked in 6 different industries at multiple levels in technical and business up to leadership roles. And through the entire time, communication training had a gap. And the gap was like, how do you be clear and concise? Because the advice we get is, here's to be clear and concise. Well, how do you do it? And I always asked and wanted to know, and there was never a good answer. And so I set about trying to find one, and had a lot of opportunities to practice in the real world, in very tense situations, in very easy situations as well. And over the course of a few years, came up with a method that worked for me. And then there was a moment in my life where it was time to change for work and family reasons. And I decided that communications training was where I was going to go, because it's the thing I was most often asked about outside of my usual job responsibilities. And the rest, as they say, is history. I now teach what I did and help other people be clear and concise in their work.
We're going to get along well because I'm an engineer too. So,
what flavor of engineering?
Electrical.
Nice, very nice. There's so many different ones. Everyone says engineer, and it can be everything from electrical, software, mechanical, concrete engineers.
Thomas the Train, who drives that guy,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's broad. Although signal and antennas were not my strength, so for sure I would not have gone to work in your field. So what inspired you to write The First Minute?
It wasn't the book I originally wanted to write, or the book I originally set out to write. So when I made the choice to go from being employed to being what I do now and teaching communications, I knew that part of getting my message across would be writing a book. It's a great credibility builder for anyone who is looking to teach or train or share their knowledge and advice. And the topic that I really wanted to focus on was bridging the business technical divide. That was the gap that I was heading towards. The trouble was, every time I taught the topic, whether it was with an individual asking for advice over coffee, whether it was a stand-up workshop, either in my previous companies or solo, I always had to teach this first. So even though I wanted to write the book, Bridging that Business Technical Divide, everything came back to the first minute. Because if you can't start a conversation or an email or a meeting clearly, it's not going to be effective. If you can't be clear and concise, it doesn't matter if you're speaking the other person's language, they're going to switch off or your message is going to get lost. So everything begins with the first minute. So it was the book I had to write to sort of get it out of the way so I could move on to the other topics. And it ended up being such a core part of what I do.
No, it's amazing. And it's so true. Everything you talk about, The First Minute, how important it is. And we're going to dig into all the details about the first 15 seconds and then the structured setting and the 45 seconds after that. But it's really, really good stuff. And I certainly feel your pain, because one of the reasons that I get into what I do is because of I feel like I have to translate between on the projects that I work on. We have marketing and we have engineering, and then I'm usually the person trying to translate between the two groups, right? And because it's not everybody doesn't speak the same technical language.
No, and what a skill! That translation is it. That is a superpower. Talk about being a superhero. That bridging that divide, being able to translate in both directions.
Yeah,
fantastic skill. That's a career-making skill.
And sometimes it's even within the same space, because I've had two engineers who were just going at each other nose to nose, and it's like, wait a minute, I think you're saying the same thing. You're just so in your moment that you don't understand that. And so,
oh yeah, that's a great example of two experts in a very similar field having an issue. There's a real stigma with the word jargon, and jargon is seen as this bad thing. It's what gets in the way. I'm actually a massive fan of jargon because jargon is our expert language. If you have two international finance accountants communicating with each other, jargon is their shorthand. It enables them to be more efficient and more effective in their work. The problem is when you use your expert language with someone outside your domain of expertise, that's when it becomes bad jargon.
Yeah.
And so it's not an issue in itself. It's just the fact that we're talking across different types of expertise. And even when you have two engineers, which we talked about different types, two types of engineers can be speaking very different languages and be so close and yet so far away.
And then, of course, you get into your own bubble, and now you're mad. And then even the things that are being said just go right past you because you're focused on what you want to get across. And why Chris is wrong and I'm right,
And that was covered in your conversations with Thomas Erickson and the Surrounded by Idiots. That's when those sort of when our emotions go up or we get frustrated, we revert to type, and there are many different types, but that then makes the communication even harder.
It really does. I know the book was published, I think, right before the pandemic, and I was wondering, going virtual and remote for that period of time, did that change your thinking, or did it just reinforce it?
It didn't change it, but it did test it. And one of the reasons that I was fairly confident of it working prior to the pandemic, confidence could have been shattered, was that the methods were tested in hybrid environments already. And these things worked whether we were together in teams face to face, whether we had fully remote teams, which have worked in that environment for a while, or hybrid, where you've got 75-80% of people in the room and a couple of others on the phone. So these methods were still valuable in those different environments.
I would argue that it's even more valuable because it's easy if somebody's on the phone or on a Zoom call with their camera turned off to get distracted. And yet this is, to your point, which we'll get into, but it's basically in the first minute, I'm going to tell you, I loved you had an acronym, BLUF, bottom line up front. Let me tell you what the thing is so I don't lose you while I meander through my stories, right?
Yes, it's that. It captures the attention. And it, particularly in those moments where, as you say, they've tuned out and you want to sort of set them up and re-engage them in the conversation. There's a classic line that happens that it bugs me and it makes me laugh at the same time. You'll be on a Zoom call or on a phone call and you'll ask someone a question and they'll come back and say, sorry, I was on mute. Could you repeat the question? But mute doesn't stop you listening. Mute isn't an ear thing. It's a mouth thing. We had a rule in our team, which was just be honest. And I would have to do this as well. And people would call me out on it. But the rule was, if you're not listening, you've got to say, sorry, I wasn't listening. Could you repeat that, please? Yeah. And that not only forced people to say it, we also made it into a bit of a joke, which took the stigma away. But it meant people were more likely to pay attention because being on mute doesn't stop you listening.
It's true. Very true. So in your experience, why do you think so many workplace conversations go off track so quickly? And I loved when you wrote in the book, conversations shouldn't focus on problems. They should focus on solving problems, which I think really puts your focus on the right place.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, we've got two different parts of an answer here. So why do they go off track? In line with the first minute, we don't set them up well. And the root cause of that is we're not taught how to structure the beginning of a clear conversation, statement, or question. We don't get taught any of this at school or at university. I was in schooling and university for, I think, a total of about 18 years and must have had a grand total of 2 hours worth of communication training in that time. None of it was focused on how to effectively get a message across, because the way we learn is either by rote or it's receive information and only ask a question if you don't understand, or if you're pointed out or told that you have to respond. And then we jump into the workplace and we're suddenly expected to communicate in a way that is different to almost everything we've experienced up to that point. And that's the biggest barrier. And the way it shows up in our work is people just, I will form my thoughts as they're coming out of my mouth. And I know what I want to talk about, but I don't let you know. And I'm already halfway through the conversation or idea in my head. And then I'm going to start talking and you've got to play catch up. And all of those come back to, we don't know how to effectively start sort of a transactional work conversation.
And I think it's also the meandering through, like you were talking about, right? So I want to focus on the problem. Let me tell you all about the problem and what led up to this point, as opposed to what you're saying is flip that. And here's the problem. Here's what I need from you. Here's, what's the solution kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. That focusing on the solution is, we don't do it for a number of reasons. So what we want from a conversation is the what's next. We want the solution, we want the answer to our question, or we want help, or we want someone to do something. But when we talk to another person at work, we usually think, well, they need to know what's going on, and they can't possibly understand my request until I've set the scene and given them a bunch of information. They almost have to know what I know to be able to effectively answer it. And the way this comes across is, if we work together and you were my boss, and I came in, I said, "Oh, Clint, something's happening at home. So my dad's out of town for the next few weeks. My aunt, his sister, fell and broke her arm, and she's not able to look after herself. So he's gone to help her. And what that means is he normally picks up my kids from school because they don't do the after school club. The stuff that was happening in the after school club, we won't go into that. And then there's this thing, and so it means I can't pick up my kids. Can I have Thursday afternoon off, please?" What I've done is I've just gone through, you need to know why before I ask you for Thursday afternoon off. Whereas if I started with, "Hi, Clint, I've got a family situation. I'd like to talk about some time off. Can I take time off on Thursday?"
Right.
That's really short. You don't care whether my aunt has slipped and broken her arm. I mean, you probably do as a human being, but it's not relevant and necessary for the thing I'm going to ask you.
I don't know, Chris. On the other hand, you've exhausted me so much by taking me on this journey. I'm just like, if that'll get you out of here, then sure, have Thursday off. I know people who legitimately, consciously do that. And I think it's a shame because there are far more effective ways to get to that outcome. I do that when I when I teach classes or somebody asks a question. I'll give them the answer, which is usually quite lengthy, and I'll say, "Did I answer your question, or did I talk long enough you forgot what it was?" Either way, I win, and they laugh. So, can you explain the core idea behind the concept of the first minute?
Absolutely, yes. There are two things in the first minute, but before I go into those, I do need to say when the first minute begins.
Good.
This is almost always the first and strongest objection to these methods. So when we start a conversation with someone, be a human first. If you are bumping into someone at work and you have a question for them, remember to ask how they are, do that relationship building, be interested. But at the moment you want to switch to the work topic, that's when these methods begin. It can feel very robotic, very structured, and most people think, well, but that's just straight into the work. What about being nice and getting to know people?
Yeah. Do
Do that. But at the moment you've gone, "Oh, how was the weekend? How's your sports team? I heard they got crushed. What a shame for you. It was good for my side. By the way, Clint, I want to talk to you about." And at that moment, that's when the first minute begins. It's about the transactional work stuff. And then when you get to that point, there are two things we need to do. The first is frame the conversation. And that sets it up so the other person knows what we're going to talk about, why you're talking to them, what your key point is, and then they're able to focus on the conversation. And we can go into some of that in a moment. The second thing is then be able to summarize what it is that you're going to say in about 3 lines. I generously give it 45 seconds in the first minute. It usually should only take about 15 to 20. But summarize all the stuff that you might say in a very clear way so that you give the other person a structure for everything else that's going to come afterwards, and they understand and can orient themselves through the conversation. So that first minute is about setting things up, getting people's attention, helping them understand why you're having the conversation, and then being ready to go into all the detail and the wheres and what fors and so on after you've done that.
Well, I like the number 3 in both of the things you're doing in the first minute. You have a framing, the framework, and then you've got the structured, and each of those have a 3-parter, right? There's in the framework, there's 3 pieces.
Yep.
And in the structured piece, there's 3 pieces. So can you just touch on those a minute?
Absolutely. In framing, there are 3 things we need. And in the book, they're called context, intent, and key message. I did a TEDx talk on this and changed the wording slightly to topic, intent, and point, which is a tip, which was a slightly easier to remember acronym.
Yeah.
But the first part, so that's the first model. Framing is context, intent, key message. The second is a structured summary using goal, problem, and solution, GPS, which sets the direction for the conversation. So it's a neat little acronym that fits with something we're very commonly using for directions. So in framing, we need to tell people what is the topic we're talking about? What is the context for this conversation? And that's usually naming the thing. Hey, Clint, I'd like to talk to you about our client meeting with Adobe next week. It's very obvious that everything I'm going to talk about is now related to that. The second thing is, why on earth am I talking to you about it? That's my intent. I've got a couple of questions. I'd like your help. Very clear intent. You now know that you're in question answering mode. And then the third thing is my point, like the key thing, the headline. So if I only had 5 seconds to speak, I would give you the headline, and it's the most important part of my message. So, hey, I'd like to talk to you about our client meeting with Adobe next week. I've got a couple of questions for you. I'm missing some key information for the report they want. That sets up the conversation. And it's not just because I say so. It's not the world according to Chris. There's a bunch of science behind this. And I will try not to go into a neuroscience rabbit hole on this. But the first thing is the topic, the context. By making that clear, it puts us on exactly the same page. And the easiest way to understand how important this is for anyone listening to this, think about a recent conversation where after a couple of minutes, you think to yourself, what are you talking about? I see you're grinning there. Have you got something in mind?
No, you had some great examples in the book, and you get to the whole point. The person looks at you and goes, okay, so what do you want from me? What's the point?
Exactly. And they're the 3 questions. 1, what are you talking about? That's why we need to give the topic. The second thing is, why are you telling me this? Like a few minutes into a conversation, if we don't know, actually, it's not only a few minutes, it's within 20 seconds. Within 20 seconds of the start of a conversation, if we don't know what we're meant to do with the information, our brains stop paying attention to the information that's coming to us. And this is because we have something called working memory, or selective attention is now the common name for it, where our brains receive data, receive information, and it processes and says, okay, what do I need to do with this? What do I need to do with it? And if you're telling me a funny story, one part of my brain is going to fire up. If you're asking me a question, a different part of my brain is going to fire up. And until we know which part of our brain to use, all at a subconscious level, until we know that, our brain gets stuck in a loop of going, okay, I've got to work out what to do with this. And we're not paying attention to anything else that's coming in. We sort of get stuck on repeat. So we have to say, if I want someone to pay attention to me, I've got to let them know. Am I telling you a funny story? Am I asking you for help? Am I giving you an instruction? Why am I telling you this? So that your brain will then go, okay, got it. And you'll literally pay more attention.
I think brains, I've read other things as well, that brains are kind of lazy. So they want to take something and say, what model does that fit? And so basically, if I don't get to the point quickly enough, your brain is going to go, well, I think what he's doing is this, and it's automatically going to go there. And to your point, I will completely miss what you're trying to tell me because my brain has already made some assumptions and is off to the races.
Yes. And we experience this as that moment partway through a conversation where we think, oh, that's what you're talking about. Oh, I was going in a completely different direction. And we either have to start the conversation again, or I have to quickly backpedal through all the information you've given me. And that's wasted time. If that happens once a day, you're wasting 5-10 minutes, and you're frustrated, and you're wasting the other person's time as well. And it's a real challenge.
Yeah, you gave an example in the book. I don't think it was from your personal experience. Maybe it was just a made up story, but a guy standing in line at lunch, it's a technical conversation. And then, the whole thing happens and all of a sudden he goes, wait, what? You got to start over. Now that I have context, I got to get out of line. This is a big problem. We got to talk about this. And now I can ask all the right questions, but we wasted all this time. And I wasted, more importantly, 15 people got in front of me in the lunch line.
Oh yeah, there was a secondary consequence. That was me. Yeah.
Okay.
Back working in France Telecom and was running a software apps for cell phones at the time. This was mid 2000s. And yeah, someone came up and was just talking about an issue and didn't really, there was lots of information coming at me. And in the end, it was a case of what they wanted to let me know was, I need to tell you there's a delay to the program. And there was about 50 million euros at the time of advertising attached to this program launch. Like, no, this is a big deal. This isn't just you telling me about something that happened. And he started off sort of just recounting the pain we had with the testers. And it was just a grumbling session. But the intent was, I need to let you know of a major program impact. And didn't get lunch at that point.
Probably couldn't have eaten it anyway. Stomach was upset at that point.
It was a stressor. And you mentioned the sort of we process information differently, and the way we interpret things it matters. When we're at work, our default, the mode we default to is, there's a problem. This person's talking to me because they need or want me to do something. There's work coming my way. It's not always and not everyone, but often that's the mode we're in. Someone comes up at us, okay, they want something from me. They want some help. They want some advice. And that's not always the case. But because that's our default position, our brains go into overdrive in problem-solving mode. If you came to me, I shared a story in the book about Emma, she was on her way out of the office. She was going to an important meeting and someone came into her office and said, Emma, this thing has happened. We've got a problem with this program. And he said, this thing happened with a client, and started telling a story of what had happened. And she ended up going on this sort of roller coaster over about 5 minutes of, there's an issue. And she said, okay, there's a problem. What does my team member need? This is going to impact the program. I need to update my message for the managerial meeting. And then the story shifts into something that seems completely unrelated. So she's going, okay, now what's happening here? Is this just a funny story, or is there an actual problem? And it goes back and forwards a few times before she stopped him. I said, I'm really sorry. I think it was Dave she was talking to. I said, I'm really sorry, but do you need something from me? He goes, oh, no, we solved it in the end. I just thought you'd find it interesting because we always have these problems with the client. And she was one foot out the door. She was in panic mode, and this emotional sort of conversational roller coaster that we can unintentionally put people on. There's a toll to it. And not only for the person receiving it, but for anyone who wants to progress in their career, anyone who wants to appear organized and structured. Things like unstructured conversation have a real impact on how we're perceived by the people around us. Because if I can't structure a statement or an update, how on earth am I meant to be able to structure a big program or a project or my own work? And it just really sort of has an impact on our reputations.
Yeah, there are people that in my life that will call me and I'm like, I don't know if I have time to talk to this person because I know it's going to be this long meandering thing before they finally get to the point of why they're calling, and so I may decide to not take that call. And
when you do that, do you feel like you don't want to be rude or you don't want to waste your time? What's the emotional journey you go on in before you press OK on answering their call?
It's usually, do I have time? Do I have enough time to talk to this person? Because I know that I won't be able to say get to the point because they're a little older than me and I got to let them do their thing. So I'm trying to be polite, but there are times when I decline the call because I know I don't have 20 minutes to go on a journey to get to the question. And I would feel bad saying, hey, just give me the question. What do you need? Because then you're being rude and you're not being friendly. And so. Yeah.
And all of that plays into the decisions we have to make when we interact. And none of us want to be that person.
Right.
Very few of us realize when we are. And I know I can go long on some of my stuff. And it affects relationships, particularly at work when we are under time pressure.
Yeah.
There's always more to do than we have time available. And so we start avoiding calls. And what if that conversation was a critical piece of info you needed that affected something in the next few days? And we'll miss it because that person has a reputation of going long. that right there is the real value and importance of being able to be succinct, clear and concise when necessary.
Yeah, I think, unless I'm getting my stories mixed up, and so I apologize, but I think that story you told about Emma, I think she was on her way to a meeting to discuss that client. So of course she was like, well, yeah, give me all the data.
Yeah.
And then none of this would really matter. I could have been 20 minutes on the road by now.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. She was beginning to think that she had to, she had an update for what was going to happen with this client, and then was thinking, well, God, do I have to completely revise this? It's those sorts of things all come because Dave hadn't said at the beginning, hey, I've got a funny story for you. Do you have time for that?
Yeah.
And she could have said, no, can you tell me later?
Yeah.
Clear
you actually mentioned there's a waste of 5-10 minutes, and that adds up because according to one study that you mentioned in the book, a 100-person company spends on average 17 hours a week clarifying communications. And what you may find interesting is we open this podcast every week with the quote from George Bernard Shaw that says the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And so clearly, if we're spending 17 hours a week clarifying communications, it was an illusion that we communicated.
Yes. Yeah, and it seems like a lot. And someone listening to this might think, well, 17 hours, that's huge. That's a half or a third of a working week, depending which country you're in and how many hours you do. But in a 100-person company, that's not that much per person, but it all adds up. And if every conversation can be 1 or 2 minutes shorter, if every email can be a paragraph shorter, or a meeting introduction can be a minute shorter, those things really add up. And that's without taking into effect that misinterpretation, the mental load we put on people by making them work out what we want rather than telling them what we need or want from a conversation. All of those things make context shifting harder, make our jobs harder. Clear communication can improve, even if it was, imagine you could make your life at work 5% more efficient. That's huge. In manufacturing terms, like a fraction of a percent improvement in efficiency for manufacturing is a massive improvement because unit costs come down. If we could all make ourselves 5%, 7% more effective by just being a bit clearer and being more structured, that makes everybody's job easier.
Just to tie some podcasts together, I recently interviewed, I don't think it's come out yet, but I interviewed Juliet Font, who wrote a book called A Minute to Think. Basically, her premise is, what if we had a minute before we went into the meeting to think about what we needed to say, get our thoughts straight? And what if we had a minute after the meeting to actually jot down our notes without having to rush to the next meeting? So if we can use these techniques to save ourselves those minutes that we can then add, that would be very powerful.
Oh, you can repurpose them. And that minute, I'd say if people just spent 5 to 10 seconds preparing something before they spoke, before they write a message, before they speak, it makes a big difference. If we were in the same office and I saw you in the corridor and I thought, oh, great, I want to go, Clint, I really need to talk to him about something. And so I rushed towards you. That 5 seconds is quite a long time that I could, in my brain, because we think 4 or 5 times faster than we speak. So I've actually got 25 seconds mentally to prepare. Yeah. And all I need to do is say, all right, Clint's coming into this conversation cold. What is the key info he needs to understand what I'm going to say? He needs to know what topic am I talking about, why I'm talking to him, and what the key message is. What is that key point? Topic, intent, point. And if I can just get those 3 things and then get them out of my mouth without all the extra detail, you're then ready to either say, yep, I'm ready for this conversation, let's have it. Or you already know enough to say, I understand that's important. I'm on my way somewhere, a meeting, going to the restroom, whatever it is. Can we talk about it later? But I've given you enough in 10 seconds to be able to make a semi-informed decision about whether you want to engage in that conversation.
And it's more than just the time saved. You actually talk about you mentioned a couple of articles in the book. One was a Harvard Business Review article that said that poor communication skills is one of the top reasons why people don't get promoted. So these can help you, maybe get that promotion. And then there was a Forbes article that said it takes 8 good impressions to overturn a bad one.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about really matters and can benefit you.
Oh yeah, hugely. And if we can go into both of those just for a moment, that'd be really nice. The career piece is, if I did a review of, I think 650 different job applications from Indeed.com. communication skills was listed as a must-have or a critical thing on 95, 96% of them. And these jobs ranged from hotel management, software engineering, sales, and some of those obviously have communication aspects. But on a broad range of different jobs, 95% listing communication skills, which is a very broad category in itself, as important in the top 5 or 8 items, is a huge indicator of just how critical it is. And then in the application of it in the real world, I've been fortunate to either be part of a number of graduate development, management development programs, both as a participant and as a leader overseeing the growth of people within a company. And without any exceptions, the standout people in those programs are those who can communicate what's in their head to the people around them clearly. It wasn't incredible technical skills, although some of them were very technical. It wasn't that they had a rich uncle in the company who was nepotizing them all the way up. It was their ability to get an idea across in a way that other people can understand. And that was universally the differentiator between the people who were getting 10% a year pay rises and 2% a year pay rises.
So normally I'm looking at this from a practitioner perspective of how can this help the end user, but now I'm going to cheat and be selfish for a minute. So let's say that I'm the person who's getting all those Indeed resumes. Is there a question that I could ask that would be able to, or is there something I could put in there, almost like an essay question that says, here's a scenario, give me the top, give me the first 50, frame it basically for me in 15 seconds or 3 sentences. Is this something that we can do?
Yes, there's something you can do before that that's even better.
Okay.
Don't put communication skills as a necessary thing on the job description because it's too vague. Right. I know world-class communicators in the topic of body language. I would never have them negotiate something for me. I know people who are phenomenal at conflict resolution, but I would not get them to present to a client or even within a team because it would just go to pieces. Everybody, but we'll go with the person who's sort of putting out a job request and then reviewing resumes. First of all, get specific on the communication situations that you want people to have skills in. Are you looking for someone who is really good at conflict resolution or really good at negotiation or presenting to clients? Or, we talked about this right at the beginning, being able to communicate between technical and business teams or between finance and marketing teams. Get specific on the situation and hire for those skills or train for those skills. That's the very first thing to do, which then leads to the question you asked, which is what can you do, and sort of have that Q&A. Create a question about there is a situation, give somebody a block of information and a situation you want them to turn that information into. For example, you could say, here's a 20-line description of our new product. Can you please describe that to me in 3 lines? And that's then being able to summarize. And you can do that using the goal problem solution method that we haven't gone into yet. But that kind of situation, that question and answer, say, here's a set of information in a format that's not good for the situation. Now present it to me in a way that is good for that situation. And that will test someone's skills, being able to translate, being able to summarize, highlight key points, and so on.
So I think I jumped ahead. I gave you 2 articles. You said, let's talk about them both. Did you cover both topics? We talked about the Forbes, the pay raise. The other was piece. 8 times. Yeah.
Yes. First impressions. And this goes back to the sort of the beginning of the conversation when you first introduce yourselves or you first meet someone. A first impression, it heavily biases someone's perspective of you. And if we make a negative first impression, like the first time you meet your partner's parents, if you trip over on the way into the house, they're going to think you're a clumsy fool until you prove them otherwise. And it takes a long time to overcome that. The same thing happens at work. If the first time you answer a question and it takes you 5 minutes to answer a 10-word question, the impression is you are long-winded and not organized in your thoughts. And that, when we're at work, we meet a lot of new people. And our first impressions that we give might be an answer to an email or answering a question in a meeting when there's a new person there. And if we aren't structured and organized, we give the impression of being unstructured, being disorganized, and that reflects on us. And it takes so much time, so many repeated interactions that have to be positive to wipe out that bad memory. It's not a 1-to-1. It's an 8-to-1. We have to have 8 good in a row, 8 good impressions to negate that first negative one. But here's the good news. Usually we interact with people so often at work, we can have 8 interactions in a day. That first answer is bad and long. The second time you talk to them, or when you send an email, you can say, sorry, I may not have been particularly clear in my previous one. Let me clarify it here. And you can have 2 emails, another meeting, a corridor conversation. You have lots of opportunities to do over and demonstrate good, clear communication if you know how to do it.
I thought I had the cheat code, man. I thought now I'm just going to make a good first impression, and the next 7 things I can screw up and I'm still okay.
And that there is merit in that. You get a lot of hall passes to use after that point, because if you can give someone a good impression up front. So let's make this a real situation. You're in a meeting at work, the boss's boss is there asking for status updates on an important piece of work. They ask a question and you have the answer. If you can give a clear answer that is tailored to something that impacts them, and you make it relevant in a way and relatable to something they can understand, so not getting buried in your expert language, and you can do it in 3 or 4 lines, you make a great impression. And then you make your boss look good, which is also going to have all sorts of favorable effects as you go through your career and so on. But being able to answer that boss's question quickly, clearly, in a way that relates to what they care about, you're going to make a great impression.
That concludes part 1 of our conversation with Chris Fenning, communications coach, corporate trainer, and award-winning author of 4 books, including The First Minute. Coming up in part 2, Chris explains the importance of asking the question, do you have time to talk about this now?
I call it a validation checkpoint. And it's a time check, actually. There's 2. There's a time check and a validation checkpoint. Used an example earlier of grabbing you in the corridor. Hey, Clint, I really want to talk to you about something. And I give you the topic, the intent, and the point. And then I can say, hey, do you have time to talk about it now? And you then have the option to say yes or no. Because if I've caught you on the way to the restroom, you don't have time to go into my 10-minute conversation, or you're going to a meeting, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
You need to move on and get to that. So if I trap you in a conversation by starting to talk and just talking at you without giving you that question of, hey, do you have time to talk about this now? If I don't give you that option, you are then in an awkward social position of, how do I get out?
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.